Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan. I'm the writer and author of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. And today I'm going to read chapter 18, entitled Walking My Own Path. It begins on page 113 of my memoir. My brothers were great athletes. Football was their game. Soon it would be mine. It's what Dolan boys did. My family expected I would play football professionally. For a while at least, I did too. After all, it's what they wanted. It's how they accepted me. If I was scoring touchdowns, I sensed I was loved. I sustained a third-degree concussion while playing football at the University of Calgary. The injury took away 6 months of my life. It returned me to my own path. What I braved. I felt so much love from my junior high school gym teacher. He asked the entire gym class to listen to me as I explained what an offensive formation was in football. Eyes lit up with curiosity. My classmates were quiet. My teacher asked me to speak up as he gently eased me in front of them. Although nervous, I felt heard, looked up to, and appreciated. Being a Dolan boy felt good. It was late fall. The kitchen table was littered with brown and gold crepe paper cut into small ribbons, and Mum was busy cutting out white cardboard footballs. When I asked what she was doing, she replied, "You're going to win your playoff game tomorrow, and I'm going to make sure every Saints fan is wearing one of these badges on their jacket. Go Saints Go was printed on each white football cutout." As I led my team on the field that Saturday morning, I remember looking up and seeing the wind catch the brown and gold ribbons of each badge. It felt good to know so many people were rooting for our team. Fortunes didn't favor us that chilly, late October Saturday afternoon. As I walked off the field, I happened to look up and see my mom ripping off her badge. In a voice I'll never forget, she bellowed, "That's the last Friday night I'll waste." To this day, I can still remember how my body recoiled in shame as I heard those words. If I won, I would be loved. As I moved on with my football career, spanning junior high, senior high, 2 different schools, and then on to 2 different Canadian universities, Mom never attended another game. Football brought me friends, adventure, commitment, dedication, devotion, risk, challenge, discipline, fantasy, notoriety, a sense of belonging, confidence, opportunity, and love. Its gifts to me were vast. But I soon noticed that the laughter disappeared during practices. I remember wanting to ask my former high school football coaches if feeling so afraid was a normal response to playing on a university football team. I never felt comfortable asking a question for which I thought I'd get laughed at. In time, the fear I experienced became overwhelming. I'd liken it to the effects connected to post-traumatic stress disorder that I read about. Sometime during the season, I walked away from the team in Edmonton. I never talked to anybody about it. I returned to Calgary. Being so unconscious in my life at the time, I eventually returned to the game. This time, it was with the University of Calgary. Perhaps being at home would allow me to feel loved. Not only did that end up being untrue, but the fear of the game steadily increased. It amazed me that no one ever suspected the fear I held, or how it was that no one ever asked me about it. For me, there was no way I'd ever let anyone know how terrified I was. In what became the last game I ever played in 1980, I sustained a pretty significant head injury. Although I didn't get it at the time, the injury, the bump on my head, woke me up to the terror that the game I used to love was now causing me. I'd never play again. The wife of one of the married football players shared with me, after I came out, that she now knew why I would hang around with the football wives and not my teammates at the football parties. Clearly, it was my need to feel safe and loved. What I braved was finally sharing, without shame, how scary football became for me, and that it was okay not to be like the rest of the Dolan boys. I'll gift myself with a generous admission or assumption that I was doing the best I could at the time, even though it might have been for either love or touchdowns. The unlearning. It felt like I'd give my right arm to please my family. But the saddest part of that metaphor is that I gave it to them over and over. Add to that their willingness to always take it. I had no idea that it was my birthright to do what made me happy, to stop worrying about pleasing others. I'd witness, in what seemed a normal fashion, other families expecting the kids to break away, whether it was turning 18, moving out with boy or girlfriends, or going off to university. It felt like a pretty great expectation. Not so for Annie Dolan. Despite some eventually breaking through and leaving home, there was still this unspoken obligation to Mom. My 3 older brothers had left, but there existed this constant strain I felt from them when they dropped by for a visit. Every time they arrived with some sort of gift for Mom. Even as a young boy, I knew something wasn't right. They were terrified children who dreaded losing the love of their mother. My older brothers were all married. All had lovely women in their lives. Why did I sense Mom hated them all? She acted pleasant, but I felt this seething dislike, maybe hatred, toward these women. Mom played her boys as pawns in all their relationships. She demanded their attention, and in insidious ways, when she didn't feel she got love, she employed a tactic of divide and conquer. Not unlike the ripping off of the football badge and the declaration of not wasting another Friday night and its impact on me, she knew how to shame her kids. It would take years of counseling to figure out her technique. Not one of my older brothers' relationships survived. The oldest and second eldest married and divorced 4 times. The youngest of my oldest brothers had 1 failed marriage and then a successive streak of estranged relationships. I'd hear all of the states at one time or another under the influence of alcohol how they hated Mom. The first boy I ever fell in love with was in high school. Growing up, I had many crushes with boys and younger men, but this was love. He was my best friend. One night while drinking Canadian Club Rye, 1967 was our favorite vintage, I shared that I had love for him. He thanked me for being honest and said he loved me too. He would be the closest I'd ever get to telling a boy I was gay. I was in heaven. Ours was a friendship filled with laughter and of great support by me for his tumultuous relationship with his parents. I loved that he needed me to listen, and we'd spend many sleepless nights in conversation. We had sleepovers on Saturday nights and also had a blast. Mom wasn't a fan of any of her kids' friends. She knew they took attention away from her. After 12 years of not keeping in touch with my friend and having come out, I remember wondering if this boy I loved would ever be open to my truth. The news of my coming out spread very quickly. The universe served up many opportunities for me to cross paths with former university football players, some open to my story, some not. Former high school friends also crossed my path. The world I once inhabited knew I was gay. On a business trip to Vancouver, finishing lunch at Granville Island and walking towards the taxi stand, I suddenly heard a voice yell out, "Is that Tom Dolan?" Moments like that alarmed me, considering the news that former football Dolan was now Fag Dolan. As I turned and walked towards the voice, I realized it was my high school love. He didn't shake my hand, he hugged me instead. As he did, I heard him say, "I understand you've been through hell lately." I immediately melted into his hug. I wanted to cry. I gently pulled away and said, "I'm not sure what you mean by going through hell, but I've got to tell you my truth." With that, I took a deep breath and said, "I'm gay. That is why I'm not married anymore." He quickly replied, "Yes, I know. My dad told me." He added, "Dad knew I struggled with whether or not I could accept it. He asked me if you ever came on to me, if you ever tried to push your sexuality onto me." He took a deep breath and said, "My dad was right. You always respected me. I know we were close, but you never did anything to make me feel funny, weird, or unsafe." Stunned and now crying, I said, "I've lost the world, the whole world I had. There are not many willing to be as generous as you. Thank you." He turned and introduced me to the woman standing by his side. The very first thing she said to me was, "You're Tom Dolan. I've heard so much about you. He tells me you've helped make him who he is today." As she grabbed my arm, her hug was as genuine as his. "We're eloping," both shared at the same time. "We're just heading to the airport to catch our flight to Hawaii." He with his new wife, and me with the partner from my first gay relationship, shared some special moments together. The unlearning for me was to find and embrace the courage to begin taking responsibility for past hurts I had created for people in my life, to own what was mine, to admit mistakes I made, and to clean up the lack of integrity I had lived with. When I think of probably the most special moments in my life where I was surprised by people accepting who I was, that is probably the greatest. The greatest. I still can hear, right, in my voice, in my heart, in my mind, I can still hear his voice. Is that Tom Dolan? And turning and seeing him, because there were many times, although there were not a lot of successful times, when I'd go to friends, right, I'd knock on some doors of friends' homes, and knowing that they were there, they wouldn't answer. I would go to some friends that I had an agreement with my former wife, I would come out to them, and in her pain, and rightfully so, she would go to them first, right, for counsel and support, so that they knew I was gay. So oftentimes I would show up and they wouldn't connect with me. I had thought about going to him, right, because at one point in time, he was somebody that I had great love for. I was in love with, and I wondered how he would hold it. And yet I had so much pain from so many not being able to hold it, I didn't go. So here was the universe being a far more powerful connector than I ever could be by bumping into him and his soon-to-be wife at Granville Island in Vancouver. So it still fills me with joy with here was acceptance of me from somebody who I spent really intimate time with, right? We had great conversations. And I'm sure for the intelligence he possessed in grade 11 and grade 12, he would probably have figured it out. He actually came to me one time, right? He and I were part of this group of jocks at Viscount Bennett High School. And he came to me one time and said that these guys think that you're gay. And I looked at him, and obviously that was a shock. I looked at him attempting to be as cool as I could. And I said nothing, and I turned and walked away. Here's what I love the most. I didn't lie to him, right? There's nobody in this lifetime that I ever lied to about being gay. No, I didn't tell the full truth, and certainly I didn't do that to the woman that I would marry. But also nobody ever said to me, you know, are you gay? So I'd never lied to anybody. And I remember we talked about that. He and I talked about that. And he said, I remembered that. He said, it was so strange that you just turned and walked away. So to my credit, right? I've never lied to anybody about my sexuality. And it's so amazing today, knowing that at one point in time, the coming out story was 2 hours and really painful. And today, in a minute and a half, I can tell you who I am. And of course, if you can't figure it out by the way I walk across a room, then I think maybe you need to kind of broaden your perspective on the world. So it is and was and continues to be a joy knowing that that acceptance lived for me, and that if I made up any stories about how horrible it was, they would all pale in comparison, because what he gifted me with was the same experience of being loved, the same volume of love, and then ultimately for a period of time I got to walk into his world with my new experience, and of course with the first man that I loved, which is really quite tremendous. So I have these great, great memories of this story. The sometimes, well, I think most times, joy of coming out, I wouldn't trade it for anything.